I was already reeling under grief, and I wanted to understand these processes and also to see what is the deeper meaning behind these rituals. So I think it was fun to update the genealogical records because that was another family tradition. But then you don't know what is the deeper meaning behind it. How are these records maintained? Who does that work? Why are we doing the pindan for my father? Why are we immersing the ashes and why are we collecting the ashes? And there's a process. Why should we follow that process? कोई choose करता है अग्नि संस्कार या कोई choose करता है CNG बिकॉज CNG में आप कपाल क्रिया नहीं कर पाते हैं. कुछ रिचुअल जो हमारे स्किप करने पड़ते हैं आपको. एंड फैमिलीज आर समटाइम्स नॉट कंफर्टेबल. जो कि एकेडमिक किताबें क्योंकि बहुत जरूरी हैं, अगर वो किताबें नहीं लिखी गई होती तो शायद मुझे ये किताब लिखनी बहुत मुश्किल होती. बट द आइडिया वाज टू राइट अ बुक व्हिच इज एक्सेसिबल. विद इन फेमिनिज्म आल्सो देयर इज अ सेक्शन ऑफ पंडित्स हु आर डिस्क्रिमिनेटेड अगेंस्ट. So it's not just a question of a Dalit versus a high caste. Burial was more common in Europe. So how a lot of physicians, a lot of scientists started opting when the epidemics were very high. When the plague was there and many other epidemics, they started promoting cremation as a more sanitary method.
Hi guys. In this episode of Discovery of an Author, we sit down with Dr. Minakshi Dewan. She is an independent researcher and author from Gurgaon. She has masters in social work from TISS, Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai, and a doctorate in social medicine and community health from JNU. Dr. Minakshi's experience includes working with international and grassroots development organizations. Her main area of focus are women's health, gender, and community mobilization. She is the author of Final Farewell, Understanding the Last Rites and Rituals of India's Major Faiths, published by HarperCollins India. And in this very interesting episode, we deep dive into Dr. Minakshi's book, The Final Farewell. And this was a brilliant conversation because it was amazing to see, for me personally, to explore the multi-dimensional aspects that are associated with the death and last rites, not just of Hinduism, but all other major faiths that are there in India. We discuss with Dr. Minakshi the role of women, why this sector and this industry desperately needs reforms, the role of caste and specifically the marginalized caste in this community, and what next, and how new age startups and companies are also coming up in this sector and creating amazing new frontiers and innovations. Was this episode to really and truly understand the amazing rituals and rites and signs and mythologies that are behind the last rites of an individual. You'll get to know not just the last rites and rituals, but also you'll get to understand death. Stay tuned till the end of this podcast, and trust me, you're going to love this entire episode. And guys, if you're liking what we are creating for you, if you're liking the kind of authors that we are bringing and the kind of subjects that we're discussing, please, it's a humble request, like and subscribe. This is the only way, not just us, any podcast has any chance of growth. Enjoy this episode. Thank you. Minakshi, hi. Welcome to Discovery of an Author podcast. And before we start this podcast, I have this tradition. So it's kind of like a prayer, but it's an offering that I start and I give to the authors before I start the podcast, and it goes like this. Our podcast and people like me exist because of authors like you. We are just trying to bank on your intelligence and your knowledge and your value. Had you guys not written such amazing books, we wouldn't have existed. So you guys are like the giants on whose shoulder we are just trying to see the world. So thank you. Thank you for writing. Thank you for sharing the knowledge. Thank you for taking so much effort into creating such great work that you do. I want this podcast to be a love letter to you, to your work, to your effort, and to your intellect and your philosophy and everything. So this podcast, Minakshi, is 100% dedicated to you. So I humbly welcome you to this podcast, Discovery of an Author.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Minakshi, before we jump to your book and we go detail into it, I'm going to start with a trivia. This is a very famous Hollywood actor Sylvester Stallone. So Sylvester Stallone, who was in Rocky Balboa and all these movies, he had a son. The son's name was Sage. Okay. When his son was, I guess, 35 or 36 year old, he died because of drug overdose. He was found dead in his apartment or something like that. So after many years, when he was buried according to Christian rituals, the last rite rituals of Christian, because he was a devout Christian, he still is a devout Christian, Stallone. He used to tell people that I can still see my dead son. I can see him everywhere. I can see Sage everywhere. What should I do? He then stumbled upon a Vedic scholar, Purohit, who's based out of US. That Purohit and the Vedic scholar suggested him that I suggest you go to Haridwar, do a Shraddh ceremony and couple of more formats or a couple of more rituals as per the Hindu rituals, and you will see that this problem will cease to exist. So what he did, he asked his wife and brothers and some of his family members to go to Haridwar and do a Shraddh for Sage. They went to Haridwar, they did all the last rituals that they had to do or that they were advised to do from a local priest over there. And once that was done, Sylvester Stallone made a statement that this is what I had done and the problem is gone. I don't see my son anywhere. And he also said that somewhere I am feeling light as if this process is now complete. The reason why I wanted to bring out this trivia is that I believe that these processes that are created are not just created out of thin air. There is value behind this thing. And I also believe a lot of people in today's time talk about death. But I feel if a civilization, any civilization, has created some rituals and rites and processes around death, what does that mean? That they understood death as a concept also. You need to have some understanding of death and how it works and what happens for those civilization to create the processes, and which vary from country to country, region to region, religion to religion. And that is what you have beautifully described in your book. I'm going to show the viewers the cover of your book, and then I'm going to tell my personal feedback and how I felt once I read your book. This is the book, The Final Farewell. It is a brilliant book, and this, Minakshi, is the most detailed work I have ever read on the topic. People might think, looking at the book or reading the preface and everything, that it is just about the processes and actual last rituals and rites of various religions, which it is, but it is more than that. There were so many elements in part of the book that I was completely unaware of. Be it about the position of women and the involvement of women over here, be it about the various businesses that are cropping up, which I was completely not aware of, that what is happening in this space, be it about the caste discrimination, be it about the various mythological mythologies that are around these rituals. It is just a brilliant book. And I feel the genius of this book is that it would be relevant in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years. The more humanity gets to understand death, the more they will appreciate these farewell rituals as well. Because I feel this ecosystem is not negated from that. It is a part of that. The more you understand that, the more relevance and importance this book is going to have. So I firmly believe that this is a very powerful work. And again, Minakshi, welcome. Thank you to accept our invitation. And I am just delighted to have discussions with you on
Thank
this
you.
topic and book.
Again, happy to be here.
Great. Minakshi, I'm going to start off with the first question directly.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. What inspired you to write this book about the diverse ways in which death is handled across India's major faith and communities? It's a very generic question, but I want to start from here, that how did the idea incept, because it is such a varied and a deep book. So I want to understand the inception and how did you proceed with it?
So I think there is a personal story behind this book, and many books do have a personal story behind them. Similarly, I lost my dad in 2019, and that's when I came very close to last rites and rituals, because I was very closely involved in performing his antim sanskar, because we are two sisters, and it was my father's last wish also that his daughter should be actively involved in his last rites. So that's when I saw a lot of things, and I was very intrigued by many things, such as I remember talking to the funeral pandit, the Mahapatra, and I was generally talking to him on 11th. On the 11th day, he had come to my place. I'm from Ambala, and he had come to my place, and I was talking to him. And I asked him, "Do you also assist in other life cycle rituals?" He was a little taken aback, and he said, "नहीं नहीं, हम सिर्फ मृत्यु से जुड़े काम करते हैं." So I was like, okay, is there a separate category of pandits who are involved in funeral work, and especially the 11th day rituals? So that was something that stayed with me. And then I remember going to the Shamshan with my sister. We went to do his Antim Sanskar, and then later on, we went to collect the ashes. And I was constantly, uh, I would say, I was amused by a death worker who was assisting us in doing all this work. I saw that his eyes were red and he was as if he was intoxicated. There was a slur in his voice. I still remember his name. His name was Shambhu because I was trying to talk to him. And so that stayed with me. I wondered why all this was happening and why was this person not in his complete sanity, if I could use that word. And there was a slur, and आपको लगता है कि क्यों हो रहा है ऐसा, मतलब there's a question mark, of course, that needs to be answered. And as a researcher, you're always more intrigued by these things. Other people also are intrigued, but I think as a researcher, you're always more keen on understanding different processes. Then we went to Haridwar to immerse his ashes, and we also went to our Tirath Purohit. We went to update our genealogical records. तो जब हम वहाँ गए तो बहुत ही अलग एक्सपीरियंस था. हमने रिकॉर्ड्स देखे मेरे ग्रैंडफादर के और ग्रेट ग्रैंडफादर के एंट्रीज देखे हमने जो उन्होंने किए थे. वो पाकिस्तान से आए थे उस समय एंट्रीज करने. और उस समय में फिर जब वो समझ आया, देखा कि कैसे ये इंटैक्ट है रिकॉर्ड्स, अभी तक इंक फीकी नहीं पड़ी है, it's all in great shape, and this was again very intriguing for me. Then when I was still trying to understand and unravel these things, then then COVID-19 came, and that's when you were reading stories of large death toll in India. The spaces were shrinking, and people didn't know what to do. The death workers were overworked, and that's when I think the idea of the book came to me, and I wrote a proposal and then submitted it. And so it's basically one thing marries the other, and then you decide on writing a book. And once I started researching the preliminary research that you do before, when you're in the process of writing the proposal, I realized that there is literature, there is academic work around last rites and rituals, but again the work is very scattered. It's one work is there in one book, and then you might find another scholarly article in a journal, but it was all too scattered. So the idea was to bring all of this together and also make it more meaningful for the readers, and also write it in a more accessible format and not in a very academic kind of language, because that's difficult for people to understand. So that is why I wrote this book, and I'm very happy I wrote this book.
Minakshi, so this is the reason why you wrote the book, but I wanted to ask you something. When you, because your father passed away and you were involved in the entire proceedings of the last rituals from start to end, and when you discovered there were many elements that goes into this entire rituals, that is when did you get intrigued that there is more to the story? Or were you personally, in a way, it was an epiphany for you ki I had no idea that this is how big that ecosystem is? Because why I'm asking, I have been to a lot of such last rituals of my members and external families, but because we were in that environment of grief and loss, our minds never used to wonder about the processes and the proceedings of this thing, that because we are grown up believing that just follow these things the way they are, don't do this, don't do that, ये हमारी प्रथा है, ये ऐसे ही होता है, आपने क्वेश्चन नहीं पूछने, things like that. So a person doesn't generally even think about questioning, or even doesn't think about researching on these things, let alone go deep dive and write a scholarly book around this thing. What made you go deep into doing research in it?
So I think it's a mix of both for me, Raghav, because because I was already reeling under grief, and I wanted to understand these processes and also to see what is the deeper meaning behind these rituals. Are we just performing them as you said कि किसी ने हमको बोला है, so we should be doing it? Or are we doing them because there's a deeper meaning behind these rituals? So why should I go to Haridwar to immerse ashes? I can also do it in Yamuna. I can do it in another. So it's a family tradition. For me, it was a very peaceful exercise. I kind of, it was very cathartic for me. मुझे अच्छा लगा ये करना. And also, I think it was fun to, update the genealogical records because that was another family tradition. But then you don't know what is the deeper meaning behind it. How are these records maintained? Who does that work? Why are we doing the pindan for my father? Why are we immersing the ashes and why are we collecting the ashes? And there's a process. Why should we follow that process? One is just doing it because जैसे आपने बोले ड्रिल होती है, ड्रिल की तरह हम लोग करे जाते हैं क्योंकि हमें बताया जाता है कि ऐसे ही है, इस पे कोई सवाल जवाब नहीं उठेगा. The idea is also to go beyond and understand what is the deeper meaning behind these rituals. Why are people doing certain things and why one religion is following A and another religion is following B? Because there's a different understanding of afterlife. There's a different understanding of death for different religions. And then how are the last rites and rituals connected to this understanding was what I wanted to understand.
Was there also a point, because I'll tell you what, generally when I also go to, the last rituals and last rites of friends and families and relatives of those who have already been deceased and passed away, one part obviously is that of grief, one part is that of just following the things, but one part also says this is absurd. What is this? So did you also had this question somewhere ki yaar ye to doesn't make any sense? Why is it there? Were there questions in your mind as well that you wanted to prod ki where are these things coming from which doesn't make sense to my logical mind?
So I would say to each its own here. Because yes, there were questions, as I told you, like why is there a separate category of pandits who perform last rites? Why is there a kind of, that kind of hierarchy, if I may say? Why does this exist? So these questions were, of course, there. And what about people who have less resources? As you said that you have to feed so many pandits, then what are we thinking about those people? What are the systems that these people resort to in that sense? But I would still say that there's a thin line between belief and saying that, this is meaningless. So, first you need to understand it before you say that. And your understanding may be belief. And for me, it might be something which is not meaningful. So I was talking to a Pandit in Pune, and she said that, she sees Shraddh ceremony as something, she says Shraddh is Shraddha. So she is also a scholar. She's a PhD in Purohitya. And when I was talking to her, she comes from a very, very different standpoint. She's just not a Karamkandi Pandit. She's also a person who thinks, who writes, and who also is in the process of making people understand the deeper meaning behind these rituals. So she said, Shraddh is Shraddha. Like, how do you pay tribute to your? She said, it's like, if I may translate it in English, it would be like Thanksgiving. I am just because she said we all are so busy, so it's like a dedicated time for our ancestors who have given us so much to give it back to them. So for a person A, the interpretations might be different. For person B, the interpretations might be totally different. But if you know your meaning and then you do it, then I think it becomes a more meaningful and a more spiritual exercise for you. So, but yeah, to each its own. Again, I would not want to make that demarcation here because I am not going to pass a value judgment here and say that A is good and B is not. But yes, if we know what we're doing, it becomes a more meaningful exercise for us. So that is what the idea was. It was not to just mention those, but also to make people understand what are the deeper meanings. Why do we do? What is Pinddan? Why should we do it? Or for instance, what do our scriptures say about it? And how are these rituals? Are these rituals still relevant in today's context? If yes, how are they relevant? How do we relate to them? So that's why another idea was to also make it more contemporary, because बहुत सालों से जो चीजें हम करते आ रहे हैं उनका रेलेवेंस अभी के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में क्या है वो भी समझना जरूरी है और कैसे बदल रहे हैं वो. And that was another question I've asked each and every रिचुअल स्पेशलिस्ट पंडित हैं या पारसी प्रीस्ट हैं या फिर एक कोई मौलवी हैं जिनसे भी मैं बात कर रही हूँ. मकसद यही था कि हम समझें कि बदलाव कैसे आ रहा है. जबकि लास्ट राइट्स और रिचुअल्स एक ऐसी स्पेस है जो सबसे स्लो चेंज होती है।
एब्सोल्युटली।
आप किसी भी सोशल साइंटिस्ट से बात कर लें, जैसे आप बोल रहे थे अभी, आपने कितना अटेंड किया है लास्ट राइट्स, आप सेरेमनीज पे गए हैं और आप देखते हैं कि बहुत ज्यादा बदलाव नहीं है,
Yep.
छोटे छोटे बदलाव आपको दिखेंगे। पहले लोग 13 दिन के बाद भी कितने महीनों तक ग्रीविंग करते थे, और अभी उतना लंबा नहीं होता है क्योंकि समय की किल्लत है। अभी लोगों के पास उतना समय नहीं है, लोगों को अपनी नौकरी में वापस जाना है, कोई लोग बाहर देश से आए हैं उनको वापस जाना है, तो जो अभी है थोड़ा कंप्रेस हो गए हैं रिचुअल्स। सभी रिलीजन्स में थोड़ा समय जो है, पहले आप बहुत बड़ा खाना करते थे, अब आप ठीक है कम लोगों को बुलाते हैं, लेकिन आप करते हैं क्योंकि आपको आपका तरीका है अपने जो भी लव्ड वन है उनको सेलिब्रेट करना है आपने, भले ही आप खुशी में नहीं कर रहे हैं, ग्रीफ में कर रहे हैं, लेकिन सेलिब्रेट तो कर रहे हैं आप। सो ये मुझे लगता है, मेरी अंडरस्टैंडिंग ये थी।
Makes sense. And I think that's why, Meenakshi, it is very important. That's why your book is very important, I believe. क्योंकि इस ecosystem के around there are a lot of superstitions as well. A lot of people not aware of all these things, that where do they originate from. For example, when we were talking over phone, when we first got introduced, and you told me something which was very real. You told me that sometimes people refrain from buying my books because they feel that if they do buy a book on this subject, they're inevitably or invariably gonna invite death within their own families. Which if you look at it from a perspective of pure logic, it defies all logic. But if you again look at it from the perspective of their beliefs and superstitions, it fits into their own reasoning. And that is why I feel that book is so important for people to understand. When I read the book, and in so many places wherein I used to feel that this is pure superstition, you have actually mentioned the stories and the origins that go back to our Puranas and Vedas and our gods and goddesses. I'm talking specifically to the Hindu ecosystem, because it is so vast. So that is why when you told me about that, people refrain from buying this book because they feel they're going to invite death in their family. That's, a very strong reason why people should know about these things, and they should be open to understanding that where these things come from. And I think that is why what you have written has very strong value, because you can help people understand the origins of certain things specifically. So do you believe that some last rite practices are rooted in superstition, or are they a result of a civilization's spiritual knowledge? And is it worth challenging them in today's world?
Uh, as I said before, Raghav, to each its own. For me, what might be a superstition, for another person, it would be a belief. So I am not going to get into any value judgment here, which I've also not done in the book. I haven't used this term superstition in my book at any point because I feel that beliefs are very personal. Even the if I decide to cremate the person, or I decide to do an open fire cremation, जो कि हम अग्नि संस्कार बोलते
Yep.
हैं, or I decide to use a CNG or an electric, I use electric crematorium, it's a very, very personal choice. So I'm not here to critique anyone, but the idea of this book is to say that there are also parallels that exist. So, for instance, in Hinduism, there is a very deep understanding of Agni Sanskar, that why should you perform Agni Sanskar? Because there are 5 तत्व and आप 5 तत्व में वापस मिल जाते हैं जब आपकी मृत्यु होती है। लेकिन एक और बात समझनी बहुत जरूरी है कि अग्नि संस्कार हिंदू धर्म में सबका अग्नि संस्कार नहीं होता है। ये भी समझना बहुत जरूरी है, और उसके पीछे भी एक बहुत डीप मीनिंग है। जैसे जो छोटे बच्चे हैं जो कि अभी 1 साल से कम के हैं, उनका अग्नि संस्कार नहीं किया जाता है। क्यों नहीं किया जाता है, उसका बुक में बहुत डिटेल मैंने समझाया है। अब हमारे सन्यासी जो हैं, उनका भी अग्नि संस्कार नहीं किया जाता है, या तो उनको दफनाया जाता है या फिर उनको जल प्रवाह किया जाता है। So we need to also understand this thing, that there is a deeper understanding and why of that. So one is that, and there is a thin line, as I said before, कि अब कोई चूज करता है अग्नि संस्कार या कोई चूज करता है CNG, बिकॉज CNG में आप कपाल क्रिया नहीं कर पाते हैं, कुछ कुछ रिचुअल जो हमारे स्किप करने पड़ते हैं आपको, एंड फैमिलीज आर समटाइम्स नॉट कंफर्टेबल। बहुत सारे लोगों को लगता है कि आत्मा की मुक्ति नहीं होगी। अब उनके लिए वो बिलीफ सिस्टम है ना, मैं तो उसको नहीं बोल सकती कि ये एक सुपरस्टिशन है और आप यही वाला CNG सिस्टम, इतना पोल्यूशन है, लकड़ी की भी बहुत किल्लत हो रही है और महंगी भी है लकड़ी, तो मैंने उनको बोल ऐसा मैं प्रमोट नहीं करती हूँ या प्रोपोगेट नहीं करती हूँ, बिकॉज वो एक विश्वास की बात है। तो इसलिए एक बहुत थिन लाइन होती है इसके बीच में। पर मुझे लगता है कि इस किताब का मकसद ये है कि ये लोगों को एडुकेट करे कि और भी डिफरेंट मेथड्स अवेलेबल हैं, जैसे कि ग्रीनर क्रिमेशन सिस्टम्स हैं, मोक्षदा सिस्टम के बारे में हमने बात की है किताब में।
Yes.
ये एक मिडवे है जिसमें आप अग्नि संस्कार ही करते हैं और आप कपाल क्रिया भी कर सकते हैं, लेकिन वो सेमी ओपन फायर रहता है, उसमें ऊपर एक चिमनी लगी रहती है जिससे कि धुआं ऊपर इकट्ठा हो जाता है, और एक प्लेट रहती है जिससे समय भी कम लगता है जलने में शव को, और जल्दी से कार्य कार्य भी जल्दी खत्म हो जाता है, और इट्स ऑल्सो फास्टर, प्लस इट्स ऑल्सो द कंबस्शन इज बेटर एंड यू नीड हाफ द क्वांटिटी ऑफ वुड। सो मुझे लगता है कि हमें ये सब समझना जरूरी है कि फॉर इंस्टेंस इस्लामिक धर्म में क्यों दफनाया जाता है, या क्रिश्चियनिटी में दफनाया क्यों, इंडिया में क्रिश्चियनिटी में दफनाया जाता है, बाहर के देशों में क्रिमेशन जो है वो बहुत पॉपुलर मेथड है, अभी अमेरिका
Yes.
में इट्स कैचिंग अप वेरी फास्ट, एंड यूरोप में तो 1 सेंचुरी पहले से ही क्रिमेशन जो है, नॉट द ओपन फायर, तरीका अलग है, इलेक्ट्रिक इंसनरेटर्स यूज करते हैं वो लोग, लेकिन ये बहुत ही पॉपुलर मेथड यूरोप में बहुत 1 सेंचुरी पहले से रहा है, जिसके बारे में हमको पता ही नहीं है। इसके बारे में भी मैं किताब में बात की है कि क्रिमेशन एक बहुत सैनिटरी मेथड है। अब आप चूज क्या करते हैं वो डिपेंड करेगा कि आप किस समुदाय से आते हैं। पार्श्व समुदाय का मेथड बिल्कुल अलग है। मैं तो नहीं बोल रही हूँ कि भाई सबको क्रिमेशन करना चाहिए, है ना। सो आइडिया ये है कि हम समझें कि पारसी समुदाय की डीपर अंडरस्टैंडिंग क्या है और वो क्यों ऑप्ट करते हैं डोमिक्सटीनी के लिए या स्काई बेरिल के लिए। सो ये बहुत समझना हमको पहले जरूरी है बिफोर वी डिसाइड द whether it's superstition or it's a belief.
No, absolutely. And because what is interesting, and thank you for bringing up this point, because why I ask this question is because there is so lack of information about these rites. This is kind of like a taboo. People really don't want to get into it. They feel it is bad omen.
I would just want to add one thing, Raghav, here. As you said that at the beginning of asking this question, that somebody said that it's a bad omen to talk about last rites, and which is why sometimes people refrain from talking about it. It's not about my book, but I think they refrain from talking about it. So I think the death anxiety is very big. People just feel, even in Hinduism, if you open any book, even in Buddhism, if you see, death is seen as something which is real. It is something which all of us are going to face one day. So every religion, I talk about that at the beginning of each chapter when I describe the last rites and rituals of each religion. And every religion, if you see, the crux is that you need to accept death and you don't have to engage in excessive mourning. How you have to uh, you know, make peace with this fact that we are all mortal beings. We are not immortals. So we need to accept. So this is also a very human kind of denial which we all do. अरे ऐसी बातें मत करो. We always say ना ये बातें मत करो. कोई अच्छी बात करो. अब कौन सा सिखिज्म में आप देखिए डेथ को क्या बोलते हैं, आनंद। अगर जीवन आनंद है तो मृत्यु भी आनंद है। तो इसीलिए डेथ को बैड ओमन नहीं माना जाता है, बुरा नहीं माना जाता है। वैसे ही हर रिलीजन में यही माना जाता है कि उसको एक्सेप्ट करें। अपना जो गीता है उसमें भी तो यही लिखा है कि भाई आत्मा तो मरती ही नहीं है, आत्मा तो हमेशा जिंदा रहती है। तो हमें तो सेलिब्रेट करना चाहिए ना कि इंसान मर रहा है, वो अपने वस्त्र बदल रहा है एक तरीके से। गीता में इसका मेंशन है कि वस्त्र बदल रहे हैं लेकिन इंसान तो नहीं मर रहा है ना, आत्मा तो उसकी जिंदा ही रहती है हमेशा। तो ये हम सब जो सारे संस्कार कर रहे हैं ये आत्मा की मुक्ति के लिए कर रहे हैं ताकि उसको शांति मिले। बिकॉज हर रिलीजन में आप देखिए प्री डेथ रिचुअल्स भी हैं, और प्री डेथ रिचुअल्स क्या बोलते हैं कि एक हम ऐसा माहौल बनाएं घर में, जब कोई इंसान हमें लग रहा है कि जाने वाला है, हम एक ऐसा माहौल बनाएं जिसमें शांति हो, जिसमें सब लोग उस इंसान की बात सुन रहे हैं या वो इंसान क्या कहना चाह रहा है, वो लास्ट मोमेंट को हम लोग या तो हम ग्रंथ पढ़ें अपने, या हम उस इंसान को कुछ ऐसा चीजें दें जिससे कि उसका क्लेंजिंग हो। जैसे हिंदू धर्म में मानते हैं कि तुलसी के पत्ते और गंगा जल मुंह पे रखते हैं, तो मानते हैं कि आत्मा की शुद्धि होती है उससे, बिकॉज वैसे ही तुलसी को बहुत अच्छा माना जाता है और थेरेप्यूटिक माना जाता है। तो आप देखिए इट्स अ वेरी डीप कनेक्शन। सो सोल की क्लेंजिंग के लिए उसको यूज करें। वैसे ही पारसी धर्म में ये रहता है, अनार के दानों का रस डालते हैं बिकॉज वो प्यूरिफाइंग मानते हैं उसको। तो ये सारी जो रिचुअल्स हैं ये आपको एक सेटिस्फैक्शन भी देते हैं कि आपने सारी चीजें जो करनी चाहिए थी अपने जाने वाले के साथ, और ये प्रोसेस आपको एक ग्रीविंग का टाइम भी दे देते हैं ना। तो आई थिंक इट्स ऑल्सो इम्पोर्टेंट टू सी दैट डेथ एंजाइटी इज सो बिग, बट वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड एंड एक्सेप्ट इट। सो एंड
Absolutely.
या
This is a beautiful thing. Death anxiety. I mean, it's absolutely. I'm grateful that we are talking about these things. When you are in such places, Minakshi, what I have noticed, okay, the immediate family definitely is in mourning, and but not everyone in the immediate family is in the same level of mourning. That is one. There are one or two people who are like completely shattered. It's like even they died with that person who died, right? Two things I have noticed, and I'm talking specifically about the Hindu last rituals, which I have been a part of. Either there are people who are completely silent, and you can see it from the body language that they think that this is the best thing to do, because again these things are so tabooed in a way that they don't know what is good, what is right, what is bad, what they might say or do that can be a good or a bad thing, and it might just disrupt the entire thing. Or there are a couple of people who are just trying to lighten up the mood by laughing and joking and just chilling, and there are these two kind of people. Either they'll be completely silent, or either there are certain set of people who are. So I also believe that people who come to these processes and proceedings and rituals, they also have no idea what to do, what to say, how to behave. जैसे आज अगर मैं, I remember very way back, I was very young, I must be 16 17, I went to my friend's grandfather's death. He was shattered, he was in grief because his father was not there. So the only paternal figure that he had in the family was his grandfather. There were two brothers. He was crying, and the only thing me and my friends were doing, we were just trying to joke and we were just trying to lighten up the mood. And now that I reflect back and see, and I have been a part of certain proceedings wherein I was silent because I had no idea what to do, what not to do. I think people also have no idea what to do, how to behave. If you ask me today, Kiragav, if I could go back to my friend's grandfather's funeral, maybe I wouldn't have joked around it. Maybe I would have been empathetic towards him. Maybe I would just try to let him cry and don't say, Ki, yaar, it's okay. So I think that is also something that people should know. That's,
But I think, Raghav, we also need to humanize people. We
yeah,
also need to see it from that standpoint. And for a 16-year-old, what was more important was to not see your friend in grief. So I think the intention was to make him laugh and make it lighter for him. I have featured two films in the book, Ram Prasad Ki Telvi and Paglet. And why am I mentioning about these films here? Because you said that the entire family dynamics comes to the surface when you attend these last rites and rituals. So it's also a process of humanizing it and saying that, my grandmother used to say कि, so I'm a Punjabi, so she used to say कि ये जो जब ये टाइम होता है ना, किसी के जाने का टाइम होता है, ये एक तरीके से शादी जैसा टाइम होता है। कैसे होता है? बस आप सारे नियम वैसे ही करते हैं, खाना भी करते हैं आप, सारे रिश्तेदार भी आते हैं, उनका चाय-पानी भी होता है, बीच में सब लोग मज़ाक भी करते हैं, बहुत कभी-कभी ऐसा टाइम आता है कि बहुत ज़ोरों से रोते भी हैं सब लोग। तो वो कहते हैं कि ये भी एक शादी की तरह है और आपको खर्चा भी वैसे ही हो रहा है, डेथ स्पेंडिंग भी वैसे ही हो रही है, लेकिन एट द सेम टाइम डिफरेंस ये है कि हम ग्रीव कर रहे होते हैं साथ-साथ में, बीच-बीच में मुस्कुरा भी रहे होते हैं, क्योंकि ग्रीफ भी तो एक वेव्स की तरह आता है बहुत सारी बार। तो बहुत सारी बार आप मुस्कुरा भी रहे होते हैं और बहुत सारी बार हमें पता ही नहीं होता है। जैसे आपने बोला, ऐसा नहीं है कि हम आपको पता होता, तभी भी शायद आप कोशिश करते कि आप अपने दोस्त को हँसाएँ, बट शायद सबके बीच में नहीं करते, थोड़ा अलग से करते या किसी और तरीके से करते आप। लेकिन आपका मोटिव तो ये था ना कि आप अपने दोस्त का मन हल्का करें, है ना? तो इंटेंशन तो अच्छी थी। लेकिन हाँ, लास्ट राइट्स एंड रिचुअल्स का एक अपना डेकोरम रहता है, उस समय में आप कैसे बिहेव करेंगे वो भी एक रहता है, बट उसको ह्यूमनाइज़ करना भी ज़रूरी है। कोई अगर अब देखिए किसी को हम अंतिम संस्कार अग्नि दे रहे हैं फॉर इंस्टेंस, वहाँ तो खड़े होके कोई ज़ोर-ज़ोर से नहीं हँसेगा। उतना डेकोरम तो सबको मेंटेन करना ही पड़ेगा, बिकॉज़ उस समय में वो एक सीरियस काम है, किसी को आप अग्नि दे रहे हैं, उसका अंतिम संस्कार हो रहा है, तब कोई हँसेगा तो वो बहुत ऑड लगेगा। लेकिन जब ये रिचुअल्स से हटते हैं लोग, जब एक साथ बैठते हैं, खाना खाते हैं, तब हंसी मजाक भी होती है। कभी कभी हमें क्या होता है, जो इंसान चला गया उसकी कोई ऐसी बात याद आ जाती है जिससे हमें हंसी आ जाती है। तो वो भी जरूरी है, क्योंकि ग्रीफ भी तो वेव्स की तरह आता है, जैसे मैंने पहले बोला। तो आई थिंक उसको ह्यूमनाइज करना भी बहुत जरूरी है, बहुत उसको। हाँ, ये जरूर देखना है कि हम जब एक सीरियस काम चल रहा है तो उसका डेकोरम मेंटेन करें,
Yes.
लेकिन उसके इर्द गिर्द या आगे पीछे थोड़ा सा अगर कोई हंस भी रहा है, तो वो फिल्म में बहुत अच्छे से उन्होंने उसको डिपिक्ट किया है, पोर्ट्रे किया है। और जब मैंने उनके राइटर डायरेक्टर्स को इंटरव्यू किया, तो ये मोटिव यही था दिखाने का कि कैसे हम लोग इस लास्ट राइट्स एंड रिचुअल्स को ह्यूमनाइज करें और दिखाएं कि इसमें बहुत सारा फैमिली डायनेमिक्स रहता है, क्योंकि सरफेस पे आता है। जब भी कोई भी हमारा ओकेजन होता है, भले ही वो शादी हो, भले ही वो जन्म की, नामकरण की सेरेमनी हो, उसमें जब भी सब लोग इकट्ठे होंगे 10 लोग, तो मृत्यु का टाइम भी कोई अलग नहीं है। वो सब आपको डायनेमिक्स दिखेंगे फैमिली के। सो आई थिंक वो उसको ह्यूमनाइज करने का भी तरीका होता है, मीडिया के थ्रू या फिल्म्स के थ्रू।
No,
तो आई थिंक
brilliant. Absolutely, absolutely brilliant point. Meenakshi, एक बात बताइए, why do you think, whilst we were talking and when you told about how you came up with the research and how you came up with the book and what you saw, you said that though there was literature available, but it was kind of scattered and not organized and not compiled in a proper way. Why do you think that not a lot of comprehensive and a very structured literature specifically from the Indian ecosystem has been written around this topic and explored in a very mainframe way like the way you are doing right now?
लिटरेचर है, मैंने जैसे पहले बोला, लेकिन वो एकेडमिक
हाँ,
लिटरेचर।
yes,
इस्लामिक लिटरेचर में आपको इस्लाम के मिल जाएंगे, ज़ोरास्ट्रियन लिटरेचर में देखेंगे तो आपको ज़ोरास्ट्रियन लास्ट राइट्स एंड रिचुअल्स के बारे में पता लग जाएगा। लेकिन अगर आप देखें कि एक एक अकेली वॉल्यूम ऐसी है जिसमें सब रिलीजन्स के बारे में बात हो रही है, वो कंसीव करना थोड़ा सा मुश्किल काम हो जाता है, क्योंकि इतना स्कैटर्ड है उस मटेरियल को इकट्ठा करना, फिर उसको कंटेम्परराइज करना, फिर उसको समझना, उसको इंटरप्रेट करना, फिर उसको स्ट्रक्चर करके लिखना। और फिर बहुत सारे आप सोशियोलॉजिकल एस्पेक्ट्स भी अंडरस्टैंड कर रहे हैं, फिल्म स्टडीज का भी कॉन्सेप्ट ला रहे हैं, आप इकोनॉमी का भी कॉन्सेप्ट ला रहे हैं। तो बहुत स्कैटर्ड है ये सारी चीजें, और इतने सारे अलग अलग लोगों को इंटरव्यू करना भी एक तरीके से, मैं नहीं कहती कि ये पॉसिबल नहीं है, लेकिन उसको आइडिया को कंसीव करना थोड़ा सा लगता है कि थोड़ा मुश्किल है ये काम। और ज़रूरत शायद नहीं लगी होगी कि आम लोगों के लिए एक ऐसी किताब लिखी जाए जो कि बाकी लोग भी पढ़ पाएँ, जो कि एकेडमिक किताबें क्योंकि बहुत ज़रूरी हैं, मैं नहीं उसको डिनाई करती हूँ। अगर वो किताबें नहीं लिखी गई होती, तो शायद मुझे ये किताब लिखनी बहुत मुश्किल होती। क्योंकि वो लिटरेचर अवेलेबल था, किसी ने उसको कंपाइल कहीं पे करके रखा हुआ है, किसी ने कंटेम्पोराइज़ किया है, किसी सोशियोलॉजिस्ट की एक अंडरस्टैंडिंग है इसके ऊपर जिनको मैं इंटरव्यू कर पाई। A big thanks to all those, because I also come from an academic background. I come from a research background. But the idea was to write a book which is accessible. फॉर्मेट थोड़ा अलग है। इस फॉर्मेट में ऐसी किताब, एक तो इस फॉर्मेट में नहीं है ऐसा मटेरियल, दूसरा है तो वो बहुत वेल रिसर्च नहीं है। वो बहुत एक ओरल हिस्ट्री की तरह, या बहुत उसमें आपको रेफरेंसिंग नहीं मिलेगी, जब आप ढूंढने जाएंगे आपको मटेरियल नहीं मिलेगा। और या फिर सब रिलीजन्स का एक साथ नहीं है। सो आई थिंक वो एक लैक्यूना है। और एक कोई भी जब आप किताब लिखने जाते हैं, सबसे पहले बहुत ज़रूरी है कि आप लैक्यूना को समझें कि गैप क्या है। जब आप गैप समझ के लिखते हैं, तो वो गैप जब उस स्पेस को फिल करता है, तो वो अपने आप में एक इम्पॉर्टेंट टेक्स्ट बन जाता है। सो आई थिंक वो किसी भी नॉन फिक्शन किताब के लिए बहुत ज़रूरी भी है ये समझना कि ये एक बहुत बड़ा गैप है और कैसे आपकी किताब जो है इस गैप को भर सकती है।
Absolutely. And two things from this thing I inferred actually. One is your book, that's why your book is an exception in this ecosystem because it is in a way written for the mainstream audience, which has never been done before. Because what happens now, Meenakshi, if such literature and such things are not created for the mainstream, they then remain constrained within the academic and the scholar ecosystem, and general public will always have a complaint that why these things were not passed down to us. This is something similar to when I used to hear ki Arey, Sanskrit was always for the elite and the scholars. They never wanted this language to trickle down to the general audience, and that is why Sanskrit was never a major spoken language the way Hindi, Avdi and Tamil and Telugu and Malayalam are. So A, that fundamental logic is absolutely right. We need. So your book is that mainstream trickle down of this very important and sacred and big topic. So that is kudos to you. One thing I want readers to really know the importance of your book and why you've written and why it is very important. Second, when hearing this, na, one analogy that comes into my mind that I think people should know about is that this is exactly what Sage Patanjali did with yoga. When he realized that so many schools of philosophy and thoughts are there, people are not getting to know what to do, what not to do. He then compiled and systemized into the Ashtang, that 8 school path, and it became, now even till date, it is the most popular spiritual book out there, which is accepted by both East, West, and all the other geographies. So I really want people to be very mindful of the fact that what you have done in this case, this analogy is really perfect, because I guarantee you this book will be relevant for years and years and years and ages, because these rituals would be relevant for years and years and ages. They're not going to go away. So your book will become that reference point for people to understand that. Great.
Thank you for your kind words, Raghav.
Okay. Now, next question. I'll first give you an example. A couple of years back, my wife's father passed away. Okay, very tragic death. My wife was really close to her father. जब हम वी रीच अप टू द पॉइंट वेर इन वी ऑल हैड टू गो टू वो चिता पे आग लगाने के लिए हमें जाना था, एंड आई वॉज नॉट अवेयर दैट गर्ल्स एंड वुमेन आर नॉट अलाउड in that ceremony wherein you have to go. And my wife was so heartbroken by the fact that she has lost her father. She told me ki Raghav, I'm sitting in the car with you and please take me. My father was also there. I mean, her father-in-law and my father was also there with me. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what is right, what is wrong. I don't know. I just know that ki girls are not allowed. And my father told me, ki Raghav, the girls are not allowed. Please, you tell her. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I can't take you. If this is not allowed, that means there is some reason behind that. And if I do take her just because she wants to, what if we spoil the entire process and something bad happens because we are not informed? So this thing, it was in my brain. And after some times, I was like, I could have stood up for her. I could have taken her. क्या हो जाता? जिसको जाना था वो तो चला गया ना. She was just missing her father. I could have taken her, right? This brings me to the question. Why is women's participation in burial rites minimal? The entire process, and why have they been discouraged? And we could debate whether they have been or not. This is what we feel. Why they have been discouraged from taking part in these rituals across all major faiths, more or less all major faiths in India. This is what I want to really deep dive into.
So for me, it was very personal, as I said, because we are two sisters, and I'm a Punjabi, and in Punjabis, women have been going to the shamshans and shamshan bhumis. They're not restricted, provided they are comfortable joining the family members. So I have seen not my grandmother, but I have seen my mother. If आसपास में किसी की मृत्यु हो गई है, अगर आप उसके अंतिम संस्कार के लिए जा रहे हैं, तो महिलाएं, women are going inside the Shamshan Bhumi. Otherwise, previously the women will return back. They may join the procession. Mostly they wouldn't, but if they do join the procession, they would only go back to a certain point and they would come back. So when my father passed away, we are two sisters. So it was out of question that somebody else would perform my father's last rites, because my father was very proud of having two daughters, and he wanted his daughters to. So it was his last wish. So it was out of question that anybody else would interfere in this kind of thing. And in my family, there is an openness for girls to do things which maybe is not there in other communities or families, and I'm not questioning that. But yes, so it was my father's last wish. So we went ahead and I did all the last rites and rituals, as I call it in the book. I was the chief mourner for my father. I gave Agni to his, to the body and to the pyre. And then I collected the ashes. Then I immersed the ashes. I performed the pindan. I did the 11th day rituals. I did the khana for the pandits with my sister, of course. But I was the chief mourner, since she doesn't stay in India, so she was more comfortable in letting me take the lead in performing all the last rites. But generally क्या होता है, जो देखा जाता है कि बड़ा लड़का फैमिली में परफॉर्म करता है. अगर लड़का नहीं है तो जैसे आपके बड़े भाई का बेटा होगा या छोटे भाई का बेटा होगा, वो परफॉर्म कर देगा. या घर का कोई मेल मेंबर है वो परफॉर्म कर देगा। आपका आप जैसे किसी की मृत्यु हुई है, उनके भाई हैं घर में, कोई और लड़का नहीं है, तो वो अग्नि दे देंगे और बाकी भी रीति रिवाज वो कर देंगे। अब ये तो हिंदू धर्म की बात है। लेकिन इस्लामिक धर्म में या मुस्लिम मुस्लिम धर्म में तो महिलाओं को अलाउड नहीं है कि वो जो कब्रिस्तान है वहां तक जाएं। तो वो घर पे ही रहती हैं महिलाएं, वो रीति रिवाज है उस हिसाब से। वैसे ही पारसी धर्म में तो कोई भी एक पॉइंट के बाद बॉडी को के कांटेक्ट में नहीं आता है, बिकॉज बॉडी को सिर्फ जो है डेजिग्नेटेड जो पॉल बेयरर्स होते हैं, जिनको हम नासुसलार बोलते हैं, वही हैंडल करते हैं बॉडी को। तो एक पॉइंट के बाद ना ही तो बेटा हैंडल करता है ना ही बेटी। तो वो एक डेजिग्नेटेड पॉल बेयरर्स है, उसका भी एक डीपर मीनिंग है जो कि बुक में मैंने एक्सप्लेन किया है, वो हैंडल करते हैं। बाकी क्रिश्चियन धर्म में भी महिलाओं का रोल रहता है, जाती हैं वो, लेकिन जो आप बैरियल के टाइम के जो भी रीति रिवाज देखेंगे उसमें मेल इन्वॉल्वमेंट ज्यादा रहता है। सिमिलरली सिख धर्म में आप देखेंगे तो मिक्स है। जो फैमिलीज कंफर्टेबल हैं कि लड़कियां करें, वो लड़कियां करती हैं जहाँ पे, लेकिन ऐसी ओपननेस है कि लड़कियां कर सकती हैं। तो लेकिन अब इसमें भी रीजन स्पेसिफिक भी है। एक तो रिलीजन स्पेसिफिक है, एक रीजन स्पेसिफिक भी है। अब अगर हम हिंदू धर्म देखें जो कि सबसे ज्यादा बड़ा धर्म है इंडिया में, उसमें आप देखेंगे तो अब जैसे आप अगर मणिकर्णिका घाट जाएंगे तो वहां पे आप महिलाओं को ज्यादातर नहीं देखेंगे कि वो घाट पे आ रही हैं, है ना, जो कि बड़ा घाट है हमारे लिए, हमारी स्पिरिचुअल कैपिटल जैसा मानते हैं हम वाराणसी को। सिमिलरली आप हरिद्वार जाएंगे तो हरिद्वार में तो खैर आप बाकी रिचुअल्स के लिए ही आते हैं, लेकिन आप ज्यादा देखेंगे कि पुरुष ही, मेल मेंबर्स ही ये सारे रिचुअल्स परफॉर्म कर रहे होंगे। बहुत कम लड़कियां या महिलाएं आपको दिखेंगी वो करते हुए। लेकिन मेरे लिए ये बहुत पर्सनल था और मैं इसको एक्सप्लोर करना चाहती थी कि क्या इस स्पेस में कुछ चेंज आ रहा है। तो मैंने क्या किया, एक फेसबुक, बड़ा सारा फेसबुक पोस्ट लिखा इन विच आई मेंशन दैट if you are if you've been involved in performing the last rites of your family members, all the women who have been involved or who think of in future being involved in the last rites and who would like to be interviewed, please contact me. So I got an overwhelming response. I mean, in my inbox there were a lot of messages and people wanted to share their stories. So what I found was that either there were women in families where there were no male members. So, I mean, there were no sons, so girls would perform. But I also found a case wherein a daughter in law was very actively involved. And then I found another story wherein this friend had two brothers. But since she was the, she was the primary caregiving person while the father was ailing, so the brothers told her that why don't you go ahead and perform the last rite? So she became the chief mourner for her father. So it depends, but there are of course a lot of regional differences. Like in UP you wouldn't find many women. In Bengal you might see, because there have been a lot of social movements, so you connect it with history. In Punjab also you would see the connection with social movements, and how things were changed, how sati was questioned and how different things were questioned, so how now this has become more acceptable. So when I was talking to some social scientists, they said that these are very minor changes for some communities. Until and unless you're not touching the major structure of the last rites, these things become acceptable. But yeah, you can't do any big changes. So, for instance, a Hindu can't decide that they want to be buried. Then you'll have to follow a process, there'll be a lot of permissions involved. If at all somebody decides to, I'm saying. So then there are different nitty-gritties attached to that. But yes, I wanted to explore that. I wanted to understand the reasons how in Hindus and Sikhs these things are changing. Because as I told you right at the beginning, that the idea was to also record or understand the changes and contemporize the book, how things are changing now, how girls are coming forward, they are getting educated, they want to be part of a lot of other things. Like women were not financially independent since till so many years. In the recent past we have seen women are coming forward, they're educated, they're sitting on big positions, they're taking decisions for the families, they're taking decisions for themselves. Maybe the number is less, but we steadily see that number going up. So the idea was to also see how these things are changing. And not to say that women should perform. I am not making any value judgment here, but I wanted to understand if at all a woman wants to perform, do we have those spaces? Have we created these spaces? Are we kind of giving our society a space to explore? But interestingly, Raghav, when I started my research and interviewing people right after the second wave of the pandemic. And while I was exploring that area, I found that many young girls in Pune and many other cities were involved in performing the last rites for the families because, as volunteers, because they wanted to understand, and these stories are featured in the books. I
Yes, they
have
are.
many, they are 18-year-old girls. So, how during the time of crisis, the gender equations are sometimes molded, but how they again come back to their normal, way of doing things when things are normalized. So it's also important to understand जो आपदा बोलते हैं जिसको हम, भले ही वो एक साइक्लोन है, भले ही वो एक अर्थक्वेक है, या वो एक कोविड 19 जैसी महामारी है, आप देखेंगे कि उस समय में ये जेंडर रिलेशंस जो है वो ट्विस्ट हो जाते हैं. लेकिन जनरली ये बहुत एक ऐसी टेरिटरी है जिसमें ऑलरेडी डिसाइडेड है कि किसका क्या रोल है. व्हाट रोल डू वुमेन प्ले, लाइक अदर लाइफ साइकिल रिचुअल्स. मैरिज में भी बहुत स्ट्रिक्ट होता है कि women will perform this role, men will perform this role. So the roles are very. अब बोलते हैं जब पंडित कुछ भी रिचुअल्स भी कर रहे होते हैं या कोई भी प्रीस्ट, महिला अपना हाथ आगे करे, पुरुष अपना हाथ आगे करे, महिला पीछे हो जाए, पुरुष आगे हो जाए. सिमिलरली लास्ट राइट्स एंड रिचुअल्स में भी ये वाले जो स्पेसेस है, जो जेंडर रिलेशंस है और जो रूल्स हैं या रोल्स हैं, ये बहुत स्पेसिफाइड हैं. अब उस स्पेसिफाइड स्पेसेस में कैसे हम ये मोल्ड हो रही हैं चीजें, given the current context where you have that's why people used to really want to have a son, because आत्मा की मुक्ति नहीं होगी, ऐसा माना जाता था कि अगर बेटा आपका अंतिम संस्कार नहीं कर रहा है. लेकिन अब उसकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग, जो आपने शुरू में पूछा था मुझसे कि कुछ बदलाव आ रहा है, so the idea was to capture that through these interviews, and which is why I think that we need to understand that how roles of women are changing in different contexts, not just their jobs and their work or professionally, how they're kind to create spaces and agency for women in different scenarios.
So it is so it is kind, you can say it's not the rule yet, but it is the exception. So there are exceptions wherein, on the basis of the understanding of the family and at least having an open mind considering the situation and the emotional attachment, the exceptions are there wherein this is happening, but it still is not the rule. According to you, how did caste discrimination penetrate the work of funeral workers? As in, how so what I basically also wanted to understand, I wanted to understand the caste discrimination. I also wanted to understand that why a specific caste is only being asked to do a certain untouchable, so-called untouchable things of these entire proceedings. And what do you think is the origin, and where do you think it's going, and if there is any silver lining, basically is what I want to understand.
So while I was researching the book, I mean, it's all about, I think when we start researching, we explore more. There are things that we are not aware of, and we read about it, or we come in contact with some people and we get deeper into these things. So while I was working on the book, I came across stories, newspaper articles, which spoke about the discrimination in last rites. So there are two bits. One is the people who are involved in performing last rites. Another are is it equal for everyone? I mean, for instance, if I want to bury or cremate my loved one on a certain Shamshan Bhumi or a Kabristan, will I be allowed? Will I be permitted? Which is a common, cremation space for everyone. Would I be allowed? Yeah, maybe in bigger cities there is not such a big problem, but if you go into the rural sections or rural paths, you would see that this still exists. The higher caste communities wouldn't allow the low members of low caste communities to bury or cremate their dead on the same bhumi, be it a crematorium, or be it a kabristan, or a burial, a cemetery. So we need to, I went deeper into it and I started understanding what these processes are, and why are they discriminated, because this caste is pervasive. We all know that we have had a caste system, and it is not just in Hinduism. I watched documentaries because I come from a social science background. I already know about these things, but I wanted a more clarity on these aspects when it comes to last rites and rituals. So, A is the people who are involved in the death care industry. B is it equal for everyone? The spaces. So, the first bit I would talk about first. So, when I was, because caste system is very pervasive, as I said before, so डेथ वर्क इज सीन एज समथिंग विच इज पोल्यूटिंग, उसको गंदा मानते हैं। वो सब धर्मों में जो है एक डेजिग्नेटेड कम्युनिटी मेंबर्स रहेंगे जो उसको परफॉर्म करेंगे, आपकी मदद करेंगे। चाहे वो जो लोग हैं जो लकड़ी जमाने में मदद कर रहे हैं, या आपको मिट्टी इकट्ठा बाद में फूल चुगने में जो आपको मदद कर रहे हैं, जो आप एशेज इकट्ठे करते हैं उसमें मदद कर रहे हैं, जिसको हम लोग संचयन भी बोलते हैं। उसके बाद जो उसको, और जो पंडित जो हमको मदद कर रहे हैं, जो मैंने शुरुआत में बोला था, अब कौन से पंडित हैं ये महापात्रा मेरे लिए तो बहुत बड़ा सवाल था कि बिकॉज इन विद इन ब्राह्मणिज्म ऑल्सो there is a section of pandits who are discriminated against. So it's not just a question of a Dalit versus a high caste, but within the caste system also there is a category of pandits who deal with the 11th day rituals, जो कि जिसमें आप दान लेते हैं जो इंसान की मृत्यु हो गई है उसके बिहाफ पे। अब वो दान जो है वो आप उसमें आप पाप कमा रहे हैं बेसिकली, वो एक हाई कास्ट ब्राह्मण जो है वो नहीं करेगा। और जो एक महापात्रा भी बोलते हैं, अलग अलग नामों से अलग अलग रीजन्स में इनको बुलाया जाता है, लेकिन ये काम जो है वो सिर्फ महापात्रा करेंगे। लेकिन ये कोई और पंडित करेगा भी नहीं, बिकॉज डेथ को हमारे उसमें पोल्यूटिंग माना जाता है इंडिया में। अब वो रिलीजन की बात नहीं है, वो इंडिया का एक बेसिक अंडरस्टैंडिंग है, बट या इट्स एमिनेट्स फ्रॉम द बेसिक अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ द कास्ट सिस्टम। तो अभी काम को अगर हम गंदा मानते हैं तो उसको कौन करेगा? अब ऊंची जाति के लोग तो हाथ नहीं लगाएंगे ना शव को। हाँ, आप मिला देंगे, परिवार के लोग उसको तैयार कर देंगे, उसको अर्थी को कंधा दे देंगे, लेकिन उसके बाद का काम कौन करेगा? मतलब लकड़ी कौन जमाएगा, उसका ध्यान कौन रखेगा शव को जब वो जल रहा है, उसको ऊपर नीचे करना होता है, विच इज ऑल्सो लॉट ऑफ वर्क। उसका ध्यान कौन रखेगा? धुआं कौन इनहेल करता रहेगा? अब कोई अपने आप को एक्सपोज तो नहीं करेगा ना, कोई ऊंची जाति का इंसान। अब जो इंसान जो चीफ मोनर भी होता है, जो कि 13 दिन तक सारे रिचुअल्स परफॉर्म करता है, वो भी पोल्यूटेड मानते हैं हम उनको भी, है ना? तो डेथ को ही पोल्यूटिंग मानते हैं, तो जो भी लोग इस काम में जुड़े रहेंगे उनको भी आप पोल्यूटेड मानते हैं। फिर तो जो रिचुअल पोल्यूशन वाला कॉन्सेप्ट है वो बहुत ज्यादा है यहाँ पे। जो हम हाइजीन बोलते हैं या हम दूसरा पोल्यूशन बोलते हैं जब बॉडी डिकम्पोज होने लगती है, वो एक अलग एस्पेक्ट है, लेकिन ये रिचुअल है क्योंकि ये मृत्यु से जुड़ा है और आत्मा तो प्रेत होती है एक समय तक, तो इट्स एनी विच वे सीन एज पोल्यूटिंग। तो अब इसका काम कौन करेगा? ऊंची जाति के लोग नहीं करेंगे जैसे मैंने पहले बोला, तो कौन करेगा? दलित समुदाय के लोग करेंगे। So that's why all the rituals attached to last rites are performed by people from the lower caste communities, be it a death worker, be it a mortuary worker। जो mortuary worker है जो कि डायसेक्शन का काम, पोस्टमार्टम का काम करते हैं, उसकी भी कहानियां मैंने बुक में फीचर की हैं। वो कौन लोग होते हैं, कौन से समुदाय से आते हैं, क्या क्या उनके चैलेंजेस होते हैं। जो क्रिमेशन वर्कर है, अगर वो कोविड के समय में दिन रात काम नहीं करते तो हमारा क्या हालत होती, is the question I ask, because it is a big public health work that these people are doing. If the bodies were lying here and there in any of the epidemic and these people were not working day in and day out, then what would have been the situation? How bad the infection would have been, the spread of infection would have been. So as a public health expert, as a social scientist, these questions remain, and we need to understand and go deeper into that, and we need to understand that how death work is a sanitary work and it is a very very important work. But then these workers, they work for meager salaries, they're not paid that well, they are also, they don't get any health benefits. It is very hazardous for somebody to stay close to a dead body, take care of the dead body. Many of the dead bodies are already infected when they are brought for their last rites. There might be TB patients, there might be patients who have been met with an accident and the body has been kept in the mortuary because of the police, work or the legal work. So then we need to understand those nitty-gritties. But yes, the second bit, now I'll come to that. That is, our deaths spaces equal for everyone? No, they're not. So when I was researching the book, And I found a lot of literature. Then I spoke to community members who've been denied access to the common cremation and funerary spaces. So those stories are real. Nah? They are not just kind of up in the air and, they're just a fiction of somebody's imagination. You're speaking to those members, you're speaking to activists who are working to find equal spaces for everyone. So I think we need to look into those. And I found very heartbreaking stories wherein community members don't have their own spaces. Sometimes in Kerala, there's a film called 6 Feet Under, where many members have to dig their own courtyards or break a room and then bury their family members. So, are funerary spaces equal for everyone? Is the question I ask in the book. What do we need to do? So these activists are trying to, you know, campaign for separate funerary spaces, the Shamshan Bhumi, be the burial space. But then sometimes the community members also feel that you're not going to pass through this area, because you're going to pollute. The roads that are leading to these separate funerary spaces are also blocked. So, then where is the fairness?
Yes.
We need to look into that aspect also, which is a very sociological understanding, but it's very real. I mean, it's not something which doesn't exist. But how many of us are aware of this? Unless we stay in a rural kind of setting where we know, and sometimes we still don't know because we feel that it is a usual thing for a Dalit member to cremate or bury their dead in a separate space, or just do it next to their house, or just dig up a space. And for nomadic communities, it's even more difficult because they don't belong anywhere. They don't belong to any village or any community for that matter. Then where do they go? So, these kind of difficult questions have also been asked in the book, because when you're talking about last rites and rituals, you also need to understand the sociological, they don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in a social space, and we need to understand and relate to that social space in order to make sense of these rituals. So that's what the idea was, and that's what I've done in the book. And definitely, these spaces are not equal.
No, very important. As I said, this was something that gave me a lot of information, but that also saddened me a lot, because very important thing you said right now, Meenakshi. You said that because it is by default that okay, if it's a Dalit, you'll have a separate place for cremation, and that is something that we all have been. It has been default for us also. Okay, yes, this is how it is for them. It's as simple as that. It is not equal, and we never look at it from that perspective, because the caste hierarchy is also embedded so deeply within us, not just with respect to the last rites, but with respect to everything. So again, very important part of the book, and I want people to explore and read further to understand. There are a lot of anecdotes and a lot of stories, and there are sometimes these workers are saying कि अरे ये तो हमको अपने बाप दादाओं से करते आ रहे हैं, we are okay. And they have also talked about community. See how they find peace in the fact कि it's okay, in the end हम सब मिलजुल के सारा काम कर लेते हैं, ये तो हमारा रोज का काम है, इसी से हमारा रोजी रोटी होता है. So the way that they have taken it positively because of the community as well was very beautiful when I read. They know their state, they know what is happening, but yet they're content in the fact that these people are as a community are doing it. So I really want people to read this specific part as well in the book, which was really beautifully explored. With the growing land burden and deforestation, are people willing to opt for alternate funeral processes other than burial or open air cremation? Or is it a challenge to make them understand? What greener options do we have that do not pose a threat to our natural resources? Let's just have some discussions
And
about this.
broadly, I think touched this component in our discussion, but I would again reiterate
Yeah.
it here that there are greener cremation systems that people are trying to explore, and people are trying to make are trying to popularize. If we look at cremation, government has taken a big stand. They have installed CNG incinerators in all the major big cities, and even in the smaller cities. Varanasi has one too. The electric one are there now. They are also being changed to the CNG ones because they're safer, and the CNG gas is, I think, relatively cheaper, if I'm not mistaken. But the installment cost is also very high for the government. And but there are not many takers of these newer systems also, because one has to forego, as I said before, many crucial rituals in Hindu religion. So yes, we need to create awareness, but then there are also greener cremation systems which are midway, and a lot of research has gone into creating these newer systems like Mokshida system. They are more common in Delhi NCR right now, and they're trying to explore it in other cities. But it took them many years. If you read about it in the book, it's not been an easy journey for the NGO who's been trying to popularize this method. uh, Many a times people don't even know about these methods, because at that point, as you said at the beginning, that when one is grieving, one doesn't realize what is happening. So whatever system is available to you, you just go ahead with that. And there is no concept of death planning in India. You just the community tells you what to do, and you just keep following that path. So I think we need to also create awareness and then let people make an informed choice. I think the idea is of creating awareness. So I had gone to Green Park Crematorium in Delhi, South Delhi, and I was just there for the entire day, and I was just seeing I was just observing. And when I asked, a family was had opted for the Mokshita system, and I was very curious. I didn't want to intrude because it's also a very sacred time for the families, because it's also a time that they're grieving. But I asked somebody who was accompanying me to take a permission, and asked them if I could just ask them a couple of questions, and they were more than willing to speak to me. And then I asked them that why did they opt for the Mokshita system, because I wanted to understand where did they learn about it, and who was and why did they opt for it, what was the motivation. So they told me that while they were in the hospital staff told them about this system, and then their parent also wanted to go for a greener cremation, but they didn't know that this thing exists. Otherwise, they said they would have gone for the CNG one.
Mm.
But they thought, yeah, this is a midway wherein you're using lesser wood, you're also doing some good to the climate, the environment, and it has a lot lesser carbon footprint. So what do you do about that? So all those kind of things. But now I was talking to one pandit, funeral pandit at Nigam Bodh Ghat in Delhi, which is also a historical ghat. देन आई आस्क्ड हिम, आई सेड लकड़ी इतनी लगती है, आप मोक्षदा भी है, लोग यूज करते हैं. बोला मैडम देखिए अभी तो लोग ज्यादा मोक्षदा ही करते हैं, नॉर्मल जो हमारा ओपन फायर है वही करते हैं. बहुत लोगों को पता भी नहीं है, पर सीएनजी तो लोग खाली दिखता है ज्यादातर, बहुत कम लोग आते हैं. ये लोगों को पता नहीं है. दूसरा कपाल क्रिया और ये सब नहीं होता है, तो लोग इसको एक्सेप्ट उतना ज्यादा नहीं करते हैं. तो एक तो अनक्लेम्ड बॉडीज जो आती हैं उनका वहां कर दिया जाता है सीएनजी में, या कोई एक्सीडेंट डेथ्स होती हैं जिसमें बॉडी काफी म्यूटिलेटेड है, या कोई पता ही नहीं कौन है इनके घर वाले, तो परिवार वाले तो सीएनजी के लिए ऑप्ट करते हैं. जबकि सीएनजी जो है वो बहुत सस्ता है, एनवायरमेंट फ्रेंडली भी है, उसका बहुत फिक्स प्राइस है क्योंकि लकड़ी नहीं लग रही है, गवर्नमेंट उसको सपोर्ट कर रही है. पर लेकिन कोविड के समय में जब डेथ टोल बहुत हाई था, तब सीएनजी और मोक्षिता सिस्टम जो है बहुत हैंडी आए. और लोगों को पता था कि उनको फिर लंबा वेट करना पड़ेगा, और पता नहीं, वो कहते हैं ना, इधर उधर बॉडी पड़ी रहेगी, तो इसलिए लोग कहते थे कर दीजिए आप सीएनजी में, हम एशेस तो उसमें भी मिल ही जाएंगे, हम आके कलेक्ट कर लेंगे बाद में. सो उस समय में लोगों को ये जरूर समझ आया, एक एक्सपोजर हुआ लोगों का कि ये सिस्टम्स भी अवेलेबल हैं, एक्सप्लोर किए जा सकते हैं. But then there are a lot of beliefs, and there are other things which come in the way of people opting for other systems. Sometimes there's also family pressure, community pressure, that how could you opt for a CNG one? You know, things like that. And Agni Sanskar is, and there are other greener cremation systems in which I've explored in the book. I've interviewed these people who have been campaigning for these systems. Somebody in Nagpur is also doing some work around this. And yes, land is a very becoming a more and more scarce community as commodity, as we all know. And there is a lot of land encroachment. There is land lobby, there is wood lobby, because people are not interested in promoting these newer methods, because there is of course, so there is also a lot of political economy, if you understand. And when you look at last rites and rituals, it's not just a very simplistic way of saying कि लोगों को बता दें और लोग कर लेंगे.
नहीं.
कल्चर है, पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी है, लोगों की अपनी धारणाएं हैं, बहुत सारी चीजें जो आती हैं, और अवेयरनेस. तो सारी चीजें जो हैं ये मिलजुल के हमें समझना है कि हम क्या करें. तो वो पंडित ने मुझे बोला, जब मैंने उनसे पूछा, तो बोले कि मैडम पता नहीं आगे की पीढ़ियों के लिए लकड़ी भी बचेगी या नहीं. और
Absolutely.
इतना इतना धुआं आता है, इतना धुआं होगा कि गवर्नमेंट को ही कोई शायद स्टेप्स उठाने पड़े. क्योंकि जब मैं पढ़ रही थी हिस्टोरिकली, so there's a lot of literature on the history of cremation and last rites, how they have evolved, what has been changing. So I was going through one manual which talked about how last rites and rituals, or the cremation as a method, as a sanitary method, was promoted in Europe, how it was popularized, because burial was more common in Europe. So how a lot of physicians, a lot of scientists started opting when the epidemics were very high, the plague was there and many other epidemics, they started promoting cremation as a more sanitary method, and that's when they systematically popularized it. Government came in, the religious gurus came in, and then how the film stars and a lot of influential people came in and they started promoting the method. So it was done systematically in Europe because they understood that this is a very sanitary method and burial could lead to a lot of spread of infection. So we need to understand the cultural aspect, we need to understand the the sanitary aspect of different last rites and rituals. We need to understand that how much land is available in future. So we need to think about all these things before we move forward. And but yes, we have to take a stand at some point in time, if not now, with all the climate change and everything. I mean, somebody might get up and say that why last rites and rituals? There are so many other things that people can do. Then I would say, yeah, to each its own again. But yes, at least create that awareness, maybe for future generations. Maybe they are more comfortable with these methods. So at least create. The government has taken a stand. But yes, it is difficult because it's also a very personal choice, as I said right at the beginning. So you cannot push anyone. You can just create awareness and then people can make an informed choice.
I think the biggest thing that I have personally experienced in this decision was that the last cremation ritual that I went to, process that I went to, it was in UP. And when I
Mm-hmm.
went there, and I was not also aware that you have these electronic options also available, CNG options also available, where you can do it at a fraction of a cost, and which is not that, and which is very environmental, relatively environmental friendly. So I did ask a couple of my relatives over there, ki they are acha. So this happens, but they say ki yeah, but these people don't let it happen. I'm like, what do you mean by they're not letting it happen? As you said, the wood lobby. So they're like, they'll go to these places, they'll bash these places, the people, the working over there, because you are stealing the. They think that if everybody goes over there, which is a fraction of the cost, what will happen to our ecosystem? So this is one very strong reason that remained with me. Ki, dude, this is too politicized, and not just politicized on the local level. This is like a lobby which is not allowing this thing to happen. So for me to decide is secondary. Primary thing is that if I do decide, will I be able to do it or not in a specific geography or not? I still want to discuss about the Ganga action plan with you. So, for those who don't know, Meenakshi, what is the Ganga action plan that has been initiated by the government of India? Can you explain this a little bit and also maybe add about the reforms part of it? Is this the part of the reforms that the government is doing? For those who don't know, what is the Ganga action plan initiated by the government and where is it right now? How successful do you think it is?
So I haven't explored, that much about the action plan in the book. I've just mentioned that how the government is trying to look at, because Ganga is also very sacred for us in Hindu religion. So how do we maintain it? How do we keep the pH balance of the water well? How do we maintain it? How do we keep it clean in spite of giving space to people to perform those rituals? And it's not just about the death rituals. There are so many other birth rituals which are performed next to the sacred Ganga. So this is the plan that the government had initiated few years back to clean it, to maintain it. But we all have to, I think, I mean, one is of course the government bit, but as you said, that people have to be more mindful when they are using these resources. When we call it sacred, why is it called sacred? Because it's very important for us. It has a deeper spiritual meaning for us. So if it has such a deep spiritual meaning for us, that's all the more a reason for us to maintain it, to keep it clean, to not throw things mindlessly, so that we can have that space to perform our life cycle rituals around this sacred water body. So I think we in Hinduism we have attached so much of sacredness to so many different aspects, so many different trees, so many water bodies, because we know they're very important for us, for our existence. So I think if it is important, then we need to take care of it and be more mindful towards it. So I think
Makes
one
sense.
can talk more about the project, because that was, beyond the scope of the book
Yeah.
to delve too much into it. But yes, we should look into it, and I think it's important to look at it from a climate change and what carbon footprint are we leaving when we talk about different resources? Are we polluting our water bodies, because it is so important for our existence? Water is so important, and why is Ganga water considered so pure and sacred? We need to understand that, and then what value do we attach to it? So I think that's important.
So, Meenakshi, this was about the book and the discussion. So, Meenakshi, इस segment में be as free as possible. I want to know about you. आप अपने childhood पे जाइए, आपकी upbringing पे आइए, आप कहाँ से हैं, कहाँ से belong करते हैं, आपका बचपन में orientation कैसा था, parents का क्या involvement रहा है आपके, how has been your family dynamics? It's very important for us to know where an artist is coming from, where an academic and scholar. आपका इंक्लिनेशन इस फील्ड में कैसे बढ़ा, कैसे आपने इसको आगे बढ़ा till the point you wrote the book. So from the childhood till the finish of your book, everything, your parents, your ecosystem, your surroundings, your orientation, anything that you feel people might connect and know कि अरे she's just like me. So consider this part like your own memoir. So Meenakshi, I'm going to start you. Please tell us something about yourself and your childhood. Let's start from your childhood. How was it like?
So I was born in Ambala, and I was raised in Ambala. I did my 12th studies till 12th grade from a convent school in Ambala, and after that the scope was limited. So I went to Chandigarh, Punjab University. I went to a college in Chandigarh, and I did my undergrad in psychology, honors in psychology, and then after that I went to Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. I did my master's in social work, and my specialization was medical and psychiatric social work. And after that, I worked in the development sector for many years. And then I did my MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And after that, I've been involved in a lot of academic work, a lot of writing work, a lot of thinking work. But my trajectory hasn't been very, very kind of straightforward. I have, like I told you, I worked in the development sector, which I still do. I work with as a consultant in the development sector, but I've also written for children because I'm also a mother, and I wrote a book for children on COVID warriors. The book has been translated into 15 Indian and international languages. It was published by Pratham Books. It's a picture book for children which tells you about the COVID warriors. It's called the Everyday Superheroes.
Why did
I
you write this book, Meenakshi? Why did you write this book, the children's book? And how did the thought came in your mind कि I need to write about this topic in this time, and that also a children book? I want to go deep into it. कि why this topic?
So I think children, when you relate to superheroes, you relate to people like the characters which have been popularized in the media, like the Spider-Man and the Superman, or the Wonder Woman. So all these characters, they've stayed with us. So the idea was to also say that there are also a lot of superheroes around us which make our lives easy, and we need to talk about our superheroes in the context of COVID-19, because that was something which this generation has seen. Younger people, they haven't seen any other epidemic in their lifetime, so it was important for them to understand that how they have made our life easy and how they have helped us navigate through this difficult time. So I think that is what was the intention of writing, and I love writing for children because, and I also do I used to do a lot of storytelling workshops with children, and it was just not about storytelling. It was beyond. It was like dissecting the story, understanding the characters, how the characters are feeling. So a lot of different issues we used to speak about, and children can understand a lot of intricate and difficult topics if you make them accessible to them.
Why is it that you had a very deep interest in creating stories for the children and around their ecosystem? Because you're
So
also, on the other
um,
hand, your work is very academic as well, which requires a lot of deep level of research, and the kind of languages they use in academic journals are very on a different level as to what you do. So what I want to understand, so I can see there are two brains. One part you have is wherein you are able to dumb down concepts for the children to understand and make it very fun. And on the other hand, you are a very renowned and reputed scholar. You can write academic papers. So these are two different ends of a spectrum. So this part, I do understand from the book that we have just discussed. I want to know this part, that since when did you had this idea, or this thing, that yes, around the children, stories for the children? Was it after you had your own children, or was it before that?
I think it's after I became a mom and I was exposed to picture books, because as we were
Oh,
growing up, the concept of picture book and accessibility was very less. I would go back to my childhood again, because first I would want to
yeah.
answer this question. And so I was really intrigued by the quality of picture books which are now being produced. The illustrations are very good. Even for my book, we Pratham hired an illustrator, and he did a very, very good job with the illustrations. They're very, very vivid and beautiful illustrations. So I think it's important to make children understand, concepts which are difficult. But I think the trick is, or your skill lies in making it accessible for children and interesting for children. So superheroes is something which interests children, but if you tweak it a little and you talk about superheroes who are different, children would want to pick up a book, and it becomes relevant for them. So it is a very informative book, but at the same time I've tried to create, add some fun components to the entire text, so that children, it becomes relatable. So that is where I think your creativity lies. It's not very simple to write an easy book, you know
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely,
So if,
absolutely.
if it's a book, if a book is easy to read, doesn't mean it is simple. So, any academic work is very important, because it gives us that base to start working from, and it kind of brings everything together. But then the next challenge is, how do you make it accessible to people? How
Absolutely.
you make it easy for people to, and how do you make it relatable? That's important. So I think the
Absolutely.
relatability, accessibility is something which is very important for me. So give me any text, and I would kind of, you know my brain works in a fashion to make it more accessible. I would think of it like any person who picks up this book can read it, understand it, relate to it, and it makes them think. So if your language is simple, and yet you don't oversimplify it, I
Yeah.
think that's the kind of balance that you need to maintain. So, but
how
I
do you
think
how do you judge, not judge, but how do you come to know that the book that you've written, let's say you're writing a book about children, that you were able to convey the message once when your children come to you and say that yes, I love it, I understand it? Is that how you get an initial level of validation that yes, I was able to communicate what I wanted to communicate? Or you still look out for more constructive feedbacks? I just want to understand
yes,
how important is the validation of your children, on specifically the children books.
the children don't come up to you and tell you that it was a great book, but I will tell you how you learn about your book
Yeah.
and how children perceive it. I remember I was presenting my book at the Bukuru Children's Literature Festival. I was invited to present the book at the festival, and there were around, I think, 20-25 children. I wasn't sure how many children would want to come for a serious session like this, which talks about COVID warriors. But there were enough number of children and parents, and I am not exaggerating, but I think every single person who was sitting in that space enjoyed the book. It is because I tried making it engaging for the children and the grown-ups. So right at the beginning of the discussion, or me narrating the story to children, I asked them that you have a paper with you. Why don't you draw a superhero or a super personality or a persona that comes to your mind when I say the word superhero, and keep it with yourself. So you make them think, and then you have these exercises. I would say the word superhero, and they have to say what comes to their mind. So every single person sitting there was engaged. They were participating in the book. And at the end, I asked them again, now you tell me who are superheroes and how do you relate to them? Just draw. You don't have to draw the superheroes, but their costumes, or anything that is relatable for you when I say the word superhero. And then I told them to compare the two. The first, when we started the session, and in the end, and when we were ending the session. So they could draw the parallels. I didn't have to do that. I can tell you that how children are very good at understanding complex concepts provided you break it down for them. So, it's important how you break down any concept for any age group. It's how you present it, is something which is important.
No, you're
So,
absolutely right. Yeah, please continue. Yeah, you're saying something.
So I was just saying that. So this is where this picture book and my different writing for different formats and writing. I've also done journalistic writing and academic writing, as you said right at the beginning. So my interest in understanding concepts deeper has been since I was a kid. I when I till sixth grade, I was not interested in studying at all. My mother used to think that ये थोड़ा मतलब 10th 12th भी कर ले तो मतलब अच्छा होगा. So it was like that. I was not interested. I was not motivated basically. But post sixth grade, I think I got really motivated because I wanted to learn new things. I wanted to grow as a person. I wanted to learn new concepts, and we all know that the education system was very different
Yeah.
back then. It was more of rote learning. So I did my 10th. I did my 12th. Till undergrad also the things were the same. You're taking exams. But when I went to Mumbai TISS, the learning process was very different. It became much more analytical. They would make us think. Our projects were very different. The assignments that we would get was more an applied kind of thing. I think when you get that kind of exposure, it motivates you to think beyond. It You realize that what really inspires you, what you really want to do. So what really inspires me is learning newer skills and to interact with different people and make information or any text accessible to people. So I think that is important. And then language shouldn't become a barrier. you know I feel that's very important. So I have grown up seeing Dilli Doordarshan. I remember when I was Raghav writing this book, when we talk about experiences in life, I remember, so I was reviewing Rudali because I also talk about mourning traditions in the book.
Yes, yes.
So I watched the film again because I had watched it when I was growing up. So I had seen this film and I had a very different, there are certain snippets that remain with you.
Yep.
So then you want to revisit it and you want to see that how an adult eye is seeing this film and how a kid was, you try to draw those parallels. So we have seen all those things on, because Dilli Doordarshan would also feature different kinds of, content. It was mainstream films. It was these kind of offbeat films which were more meaningful. Then you remember watching a lot of these films, how I had watched it then. Maybe if I was not a DD generation kid, I wouldn't have watched that series
Yep.
on television. So I think DD played a very important role in giving you the exposure to different cultures. you know I remember watching Bunyad. I don't know if you have heard about
I
Bunyad.
have.
Yeah, so Bunyad, and how you understand partition, how you understand the problems that people faced when the partition happened, and what were the challenges. So you were exposed to such a different culturally enriching content when you were growing up in your 80s. So it was, and that stayed with me. It's just not about the textual understanding. I think it's also about that exposure of understanding things. In my family, my grandfather and my grandmother came from Pakistan. So my grandfather used to write letters in Urdu to his siblings. And I still remember वो पीले वाले पोस्ट कार्ड आते थे,
Yes.
याद है? उसके पीछे लोग लिख के भेज देते थे लेटर्स, जो छोटा कुछ मैसेज भेजना है तो वो आते थे। और हम लोग वो घर के बाहर एक पोस्ट बॉक्स, छोटा सा लेटर बॉक्स लगा रहता था, उसके अंदर से चिट्ठी निकाल के लाते थे। एंड वी यूज्ड टू बी गेट सो एक्साइटेड looking at letters written in Urdu, because we didn't know how to
Yes.
speak
So
in
exotic
Urdu.
language. Yeah.
It was a very exciting experience for me, and it was culturally. it was a very good cultural exposure back then, because my grandfather would tell us stories about how it was in Pakistan, now Pakistan, how it was, the Punjab was very different then,
Yep.
how different communities used to live together, and how things have changed. So, I have been fed with those kind of stories, and how I have challenged some notions as I'm growing up. And, so it was, and then I've studied in a convent school. So, you're also exposed to a Christian kind of
Yes.
understanding, and you come from a Punjabi Hindu family. And my parents have been very, I come from a very open family wherein girls are not treated differently than boys. So we were told to concentrate on our studies. The value, there was a lot of value given to studies, that you should learn, have a career for yourself, because my mother, she was trained in nursing, she did her BSc in nursing, so she used to have a small dispensary. My father had a business in pharmaceutical. My grandfather was in the administration. He was a tehsildar. And so we had this mix of people from different backgrounds, and you learn different things from different people. So I think that exposure was very important for me when I was growing up. And then, of course, as I spoke about television, the films that we saw. And I think so these things, they invariably or unwittingly leave an impact on you. So when you grow up to be a person who has, and being a small town girl, I think I have my roots intact. So, when I approach people, I'm an introvert, but uh, I still don't find it difficult to strike a conversation with anyone. Be it a death worker, be it a person in Varanasi who's working at the ghats, be it a person who's writing films, and people from very varied backgrounds. It's because I come from a small town. So my my relatability with people becomes very different, because you meet so many different people. And then I went to Mumbai, and you meet, your cultural understanding becomes even wider when you move to big cities from a smaller town, and yet you're very rooted, because you understand that how roots are so important for you. So I think that kind of amalgamation of these different kind of experiences make me what I am today. And I think that's important to and I think my principles are very important for me. Even for the book, I
Yep.
have sincerely taken permissions from people before interviewing them, taken written permissions from people. I have tried to be as neutral as possible in the book, and many people have come back and they've said this is one of the secular books on last rites and rituals that they have read. So it's something, because I come from a frame of mind where I want to present things from a very unbiased. Of course, a writer's bias would come. It's very natural, but we need to be conscious of those biases, I think, and that's something which is very important to me. So
And it
I
was
think,
evident in the entire conversation and also in the book, it was very evident that you are not trying to put forth what you think about a particular thing. You are just stating what it is and let people decide what they think is right or wrong, what they want to do, discuss on. And in the conversations as well, you are very clear. आपके family में was there, as you said, your grandfather used to narrate you stories. Anybody else in your family who used to write or read? Or did you, there was a point in your life when you decided कि यार एक दिन तो मैं author banungi, or I will publish a trade book. Is that something that came into mind? That yes, one day I would want to beat the children book or beat anything.
no, I never imagined myself becoming a writer. I will tell you one anecdote, and I think I often tell it to many of my friends, and it's very funny that how in 11th grade, I think I was writing my English test paper, and I was a slow writer. So I was not fast at writing the thing, and you had to use the pen, and then the papers were big and the answers were big. So the time was very limited. So I didn't even have the time to turn the page. So I wrote the answer in the margins. And my teacher, she was so upset, and she said, "This is hardly comprehensible what you have written, Minakshi." And she showed the paper to the entire class, saying that, "See, how filthy can somebody write?" So I think these experiences are also something, and I had decided at that. I mean, I hadn't decided that I want to become a writer, but I one thing was very clear, that I am never going to ridicule somebody for making an attempt to finish something. I think it was important for her to tell me that I need to write, be a better organizer with time. I need to write a neater, and that's what a teacher needs to do. But do you need to do it in public is something which I had questioned then, and I had decided that I'm not going to ridicule. If I ever become a teacher or as a parent, I'm not going to ridicule my child in public, because this is something which could be demeaning for a person. So, I mean, if you see that I don't have a history of writing very well or writing very clearly, but then I know what my strength is. If you still give me a paper and you tell me that I need to finish this paper in this time frame, I still might fail. So it's not the criteria to judge a person's ability or their genius. I think what is important is I know what my strength is, that my skill at looking at things from a very analytical,
Yeah.
and that has also happened with training. So I think writing is something that you learn. I mean, not everybody is born to be a good writer. We
Yes.
just feel and we believe that everybody who writes well is born with a certain skill. No, we learn it. We learn the craft of writing because we do it every day. We practice it every day. I give myself the scope or time to practice it again and again, and that's true for any profession, be it marketing, be it if you want to become a scientist, you want to be a space scientist, or anything. Even if you want to become a good pilot, you need to practice your skills every day, and so is true what is true for writing. You need to sit and practice that craft and you learn. There are so many skills which are involved in writing, because writing is not just about having your grammar right. It's also about streamlining your thought process, and all writers are, I think, very good organizers. In their head they know they're organizing this content to make it accessible for readers. So there is a lot of background work that goes into becoming good with whatever you do
No, that is
and
brilliant.
giving it good.
हाँ. So, Meenakshi, इसी पे I want to now ask a next question because we have come to a very great point. So, I'll give you a situation. Okay, I'll give you a problem, not a problem statement, a situation. So, let's say today I am somebody who has had decided that one day I would write a non-fiction book. Let's say a self-help book, let's say a spiritual book or whatever. I want to know, but I have no idea how to structurize it. Do you first think of a title? Do you first think of content? How do I do my research? Do I go to the ground to do my research or do I read different books? I am somebody who wants to write a non-fiction book on a particular topic, but I don't know the ABCD of starting from idea, research, structurizing, the tools that you use to type it down, edit everything, and submitting it to the a big publisher, let's say HarperCollins, and the process. So I want to understand from inception to a final output. What is your process?
So I think what is most important is that you choose your area that you want to write, or the subject that you need to work on. Like I told you right at the beginning, that I had decided that I want to write a book around last rites and rituals. So, if you've decided that you want to write a book, first you need to do research that what kind of work already exists in this. As I told you, I already saw that there was work, but it was very scattered, it was disjointed, and it was very academic. So I need to find that gap. For any research, for any non-fiction work, you need to look at the gap first and then decide, yeah, you're very passionate about that subject, but there is enough and more written about that subject, or maybe a different angle that hasn't been explored. Maybe people have written a lot about for instance, mental health of teenagers. But there is one dimension maybe that hasn't been touched upon, so you go into that area. So first is to look for the lacuna, and see that this doesn't exist, and this is how you can fill that gap through this book. Because whenever you submit a proposal to any publisher, they would first see where you're coming from. You have to have some writing credentials first of all, because writing credentials, when I say, maybe you run your own blog, maybe you've written some work, or maybe you are one personality uh, who would, whose biography or whose experience would really add something to the for people to learn. So either it could be that, or it is a gap which people would want to understand better. So it has to be a mix of these things, maybe A or maybe B for some person, and then you have to have good, because they would want to see your writing credentials or your professional credentials. For instance, if you haven't written so much but you have a lot to say, your life has been very interesting, you have, for instance, climbed Mount Everest, and you have a very different experience from others, what others have experienced. So you want to write about that, and people would be interested in reading about that, for instance. So then you decide on writing it, and then you have a strong bio, you submit the proposal, you write about it. For non-fiction book, you don't have to give the complete manuscript, unlike a fiction work of
Oh,
fiction.
okay.
Yeah, you need to
Interesting.
submit maybe two chapters with a very good proposal, and you submit it to the publisher, commissioning editor, and then if they're interested in it, they would present it to the larger team, and then if they like it, they would take you on board, and then you start working on your book. And so you need to my process is that I look at different chapters and proposal that I have submitted, and also things that I want to explore as I am going deeper into my research. For
Is there a
instance,
checklist? Is there a checklist that you follow before you submit? Okay, for example, like I have to make sure that the 2 3 chapters that I send are proofread, are edited properly. They have references and citations which are there inside. So so? What is your checklist before you send it to any publishing house? Because it is non-fiction, because it needs to have everything in
yeah, it needs
references.
to have that authenticity. Like if I am giving some, I am referencing to some material, then I should perhaps give some sort of, if I'm citing something, then I need to have some sort of referencing. Uh, and, it should show my credibility, my seriousness towards this work, and which kind of comes through. I mean, you don't have to say it that, oh, I am a very serious worker, and I am very motivated. It comes through your proposal. They know that, yeah, once you have put in so much effort in writing a good nuanced proposal, you would definitely be able to write, because it is very difficult to write a good proposal which is crisp, which is sharp, and which has all the elements that a book may have, or would have. So I think it's good to do that research well and understand. Then they know that you know your stuff well. So I think it's about that.
Yeah. So what happens post publish submitting? So let's say you submitted the proposal, then
And then your book is commissioned if they like it, and if they don't like it, it gets rejected. And then if it gets accepted, you sign a contract, and then you start working on the book, and then you have a timeline, mutual timeline decided by your publisher and you work on your manuscript, you submit the manuscript, the full manuscript, with everything, referencing everything, the introduction, the preface, and the afterword, and everything. You submit the complete manuscript in the time frame that has been mutually decided, and then the editing process starts. You would get a feedback, and then you start editing, and then the non-fiction books also go through a legal read. A legal team will go through your book and will tell you that you need to work on these areas, and you need to strengthen these areas, and then you work on those comments, and then the copy editing, the proofreading, everything happens. And then the cover design is also something which you work with your publisher, and you sometimes just decide what you don't want, and sometimes you just decide what you want, what are the elements that we should be more concerned about, and we need to concentrate, because book cover is very important in popular
absolutely.
novel.
Yeah, yeah. But Meenakshi, tell me, very important thing which I always used to get confused, and I think it's very important. Specifically in this case, let's say we talk about your book. How much of an intervention or involvement was there of the assigned editor in your? in specifically for your book?
To each its own again. But for me, I don't think much of, we call that structural editing,
Okay.
because that is something that you decide on, that we
Okay.
don't need this part and we need to delete it. It's becoming repetitive. For me, it wasn't much. It was maybe a couple of paragraphs that I needed to. I also understood that this is kept getting a little repetitive, and do we really need this? Would this really strengthen the book? But for me, most of it was, I mean, it didn't go through much of structural editing per se, but yes, we worked on many other parts, which was, copy editing and other bits we did, strengthening the language and, all the other grammatical bits. And we did that, but not structural editing was something that was not big for me. But to each its own. I don't know about the process of other authors and how it works between the editors and the authors. But for me, I think it wasn't a lot of. I didn't have to delete a lot of stuff that I had written, because I had maybe I had already done a lot of work before the manuscript went into the editing process, or maybe I'd already written only as much was important. It could be a function of
Yeah.
both.
Makes
So,
sense. Yeah.
yeah.
Meenakshi, one last question before we move to the book reading part of it. How has been the response for your book? Any particular responses, any particular reaction do you remember of people coming up to you, praising the book? How had people received your book? What have they said? Anything that you found very heartwarming? Anything that you found ki, wow, this just made my day? Any incidents or, that you would like to share regarding the reception of your book, receptivity of your book?
So it's been a very, very interesting journey. I think writing a book is only one part of the story. I think the next part is, how do you make that book discoverable? How do you help people discover the book or the title that you've written? Because I always say it's like a baby. You have put in a lot of hard labor into writing that book. You have you have sacrificed a lot of your time with your family and other social events and so many different things. So I think it's very important, how do you make people discover your book? And I have done every bit to make this book more discoverable. I have not said no for interviews. I've been more open to being interviewed by different. I have done many, I would say, I don't know how many podcasts I've already appeared on, be it, I mean, I've shared the links with you. I think Aaj Tak was the first podcast. I went to the studio and we recorded. It was a long form podcast. We had a very long discussion on that and I really enjoyed it. And then there has been no stop no stopping for me, because I have been doing podcasts and book has been reviewed by all the big media houses and publishing, I mean, newspapers, and it has been reviewed by so many bookstagrammers as well. And I've been approached by people that they have told me that they want to review the book, instead of me going and approaching people that, oh, would you like to review the book? And so I mean, be it Times of India, be it Business Standard, be it New Indian Express, there is a very important paper in Kashmir, a national newspaper. They have done the review. Outlook, Frontline, Hindu has done the, you get those books, new books that they which they put on their thing, that book racks and stuff that they do, new books on the rack. Hindu has done that. And then Deccan Herald, and I've written opinion pieces. I've been invited to write opinion pieces around my book. It has also been reviewed by one of the finest academic journals, which is related to death. It's called Death and Mortality Journal. It's by Routledge. That journal has reviewed the book. I have presented the book at the recent American Anthropological Association's annual meeting, which is their annual conference. I've presented a chapter from the book, which goes through a peer review process. You submit the abstract, and then, so what I'm trying to say, that I was not expecting the book to be covered so widely, because when you write, you're a debut author. You're just doing your bit. Then you're not thinking so much about how the book would do, because I think you're so busy writing the book and creating something that you don't get into those kind of distractions. But once I think you've written the book and you know that it's been received well, and it's been reviewed widely, you understand that it's an important book. It's
Yes.
an important topic and people want to talk about it. And people have left reviews on LinkedIn. I mean, I don't know those people, and people have left reviews and tagged me on LinkedIn. And these are not by friends or people I know, like random reviews have been left. I remember somebody contacted me on Insta, and she picked up a copy of the book from, I think, Bangalore airport. She was coming back from her grandmother's funeral, and she saw the book, and then she messaged me that how it was like a calling, and she picked up the copy, and then she also has her own podcast, and she told me if I would like to talk about my book on her podcast. And so how this book has kind of made people think about last rites, and then people have started talking about death literacy. And so I think in that sense the book has been received well. Yeah, some people have been reluctant in getting the copy because they think they're inviting bad omen, but not all, I would say.
मीनाक्षी, we'll come to the last part. Let's do that book reading. तो वो पार्ट जो है आपको जितना पढ़ना है, जितना भी आप पढ़ना चाहें, पूरा पढ़ना चाहें, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, it's completely up to you. Yeah, let's start.
Yeah. So this is chapter 12 of the book, Varanasi, a site of death tourism. So I would read the introduction of this chapter and then maybe I would go into some subsections. Varanasi is India's religious capital. The city was named after the Varuna and Asi rivers that once surrounded it. Its most important gift is the bestowal of moksha. Many people come here to die, choosing Varanasi as their final home before departing from this world. Many corpses are brought to the ghats for cremation, often from long distances in India and around the world. Others have their ashes brought to the city to be immersed in the sacred Ganga. Intrigued by death, I delved deeper into the last rites and rituals of the city of death. It was one thing to read about last rites, but seeing them with my own eyes was quite a reminder. Varanasi celebrates death. It is not feared here, like other Indian cities. Death is a source of liberation in Varanasi. Everyone had something to share about death and the last rites in Varanasi. From my auto driver to boatmen, each enriched my understanding. Moreover, there is something for everyone in the city of light, fulfilling the deep desires of pilgrims and moksha seekers and the curiosity of researchers and foreign tourists. So now we would get into Bhasm Holi of Manikarnika Ghat celebrating death. Have you heard of the Bhasm Holi in Varanasi? My auto driver intrigued, inquired. I was unaware of this one of a kind celebration. However, after he piqued my interest, I inquired about this unique Holi. When I asked my boatman Mohan, he showed me some videos he had taken during the previous Holi. The entire Manikarnika Ghat and the road leading to the burning ghat was flooded with people dancing aesthetically to celebrate the festival. It was a rare sight, enjoyed by both locals and tourists. The holy city of Varanasi is famous for its ghats, bhang, flavorful pan, Banarsi saris, chaat, and frothy malai. However, it is also famous for its Chitta Bhas Holi, which is celebrated at Manikarnika Ghat in the midst of funeral pyres. Chitta Bhas Holi is a holy celebration played with funeral ashes at Varanasi's Manikarnika Ghat. Because Kashi has a strong connection with Shiv, who has a close relationship with death. We celebrate Holi with ashes at the Manikarnika Ghat, said Amit Sharma, my guide during my trip. This kind of Holi can only be imagined in the land of Shiva. Diana L. Eck writes Shiva is the Holy One who challenges human distinctions of pure and impure, auspicious and inauspicious. He is the deity who may be beautiful or terrifying, who may anoint his body with the grey ashes of the dead. According to the legend, Lord Shiva went to Manikarnika Ghat after his marriage to Parvati to play holy with ghosts and spirits. As a result, ascetics and saints continue to play holy at the ghat in order to preserve the tradition. The Bhasm Holi has been practiced since ancient times and is also mentioned in ancient texts such as the Skand Purana. This was told by me by a travel company owner. Bhasmoli has recently gained popularity among tourists due to social media coverage. As a result, in addition to locals, many tourists now participate in the festivities. This was again told by some local person in Varanasi. After ritually presenting Shiva with the unique Bhog Prasad, concentrated leavings of the deity, prasad, I'm just defining it, of ganja, madira, and bhang, the crowd gathers at the ghat to celebrate Holi amidst the music. Interestingly, the famous Hindustani classical singer Pandit Channulal Mishra from Banaras dedicated a geet titled Digambar Khele Mashane Mein Holi to this special occasion. I would like to see the festival with my own eyes someday, rejoicing in the unique celebration that demonstrates how death is commemorated in Varanasi in a variety of ways. So, this is about Bhasp Holi, and then I would like to read a little about the death tourism in the city of death. For ages, Varanasi has fascinated tourists, international and domestic alike. Besides being the most important pilgrimage site for Hindus, the ancient city of Varanasi attracts tourists to cremation ghats of Aghori ritual spaces, among others. Some call it dark tourism, also known as grief tourism. Dark tourism involves people's keen interest in visiting places linked to death, suffering, and tragedy. Sounds bizarre? However, this concept is fast catching up with the trends. One can't deny that, other than spirituality, mystic death rituals and esoteric practices at the burning ghats of the city attract scores of foreign tourists and visitors drawn to morbid. Newspaper and research articles reveal, among other things, how tourists are attracted to death and associated rituals in Varanasi. For example, a travel blogger for a popular tourist site wrote, being closely connected to travel, I've come across tourism of all kinds: adventure, eco friendly, cultural, and even virtual. But nothing as unusual as death tourism. The unearthly Manikarnika Ghat in Varanasi thrives solely on that. Not a single day passes when dead bodies are not cremated here, with the number going up to 2 to 300 every day. So to know that tourists come here to see the funeral pyres being set on fire in the open is more weird than fascinating. Another international newspaper article mentioned this morbid site is attracting more than just the dying. 40,000 foreign tourists travel to Varanasi each year for a holiday of the dark and twisted kind. Travelers can not only watch public cremations but also take rides among the rotting corpses in the water. Intrigued by these clips, I was motivated to unravel varied aspects of tourism in Varanasi. In the process, I interviewed travel and tour company owners operating in Varanasi. However, the conversations revealed that the burning ghats of Varanasi, Aghori ritual practices, and Mukti Bhavan attract foreign tourists. Travel companies receive queries about these sites around death and cremation in Varanasi. Not only tourists, but also international publications show interest in these sites. Based on the demand, these travel companies commenced walking tours to fulfill the tourists' mysterious interest in watching the morbid. A glance at travel companies' websites reveals a fascination with death in Varanasi. Travel and tour companies like Groovy Travels, Varanasi Walks, and TripAdvisor offer walks to the burning ghats of Varanasi and Aghori Ashram. For example, Varanasi Walks organizes a walking tour named Death and Rebirth in Banaras. The website mentions walk with us through the city and see Banaras as Mahashamshan, the great cremation ground. I would finish it here, and I would want readers to read more about this.
Very fascinating. It was even I had no idea. I had some idea, but this was just it's like an another dimension. Anyone, Minakshi, who's not from the Indian ecosystem, if he or she will read this part, it'll blow them away. Ki, wow, what is this? This is unreal, right? What
So,
happens?
Raghav, I read about this in an academic journal about the grief tourism and dark tourism, and it intrigued me, and I went deeper into it. So I just read that article, which was very different,
Yeah,
and then I wanted to cover so many different aspects. So I do give credit to that article
yeah,
because that
yes,
was something that intrigued me, and I wanted to get deeper into this aspect of dark tourism. And I took a death walk myself in Varanasi when I went there to look at
yeah,
different aspects and conduct my research.
yes,
Because when you want to write about it, you also want to experience it first, and then you
absolutely.
can write about it. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, it was very fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating. I am looking at Varanasi now at a different light as well. I mean, it's just brilliant. Now I do understand ki why they call it the land of the moksha, the liberation, everything, and because these things are a part of that ecosystem. Very brilliant, Meenakshi.
But another thing that I wanted to highlight here was that even I asked these companies who organize the walks that why is it so fascinating for people who are coming from outside, like the foreigners, and people are not who are not from this kind of
Hmm.
ecosystem. So they said that they haven't experienced cremation, open fire cremation, or cremation in this
Yeah.
format in
Yeah.
their own countries.
Hmm.
So to see it is also a kind of cultural exposure for them, and it's also to kind of it's also cultural shock for them in a way, because to see a body burning, because seeing a body going into the incinerators and then the ashes coming out is a different ball game. But when you see somebody, something disintegrating right in front of you, is a very different experience.
Yeah.
People
Absolutely.
also want to culturally understand it better, and which is why they want to do it. It's not just to you know demean it or say that, oh, I'm fascinating, and make it very glamorous and you want to do it. But it's also it's very educative also in a way, because
Absolutely.
when you're trying to absorb another culture, it also educates you about different facets of that culture.
Absolutely.
I think
It
you should
does.
take pride in that aspect and
Yeah.
not feel bad about it in that sense.
Yeah, no, brilliant. This was absolutely brilliant. And again, this is a brilliant book that you've written. I really hope and wish more people read it as time passes by, they understand the ecosystem. So, yeah, so I really want people to get the book. It's brilliant. It will just expand your horizon. You'll be blown away by the facts. So, I really, again, tell people to read it. Dr. Meenakshi, thank you. Thank you for giving us so much time. Thank you for imparting your knowledge. Thank you for painstakingly writing this brilliant book. I hope you love this interaction. I know, I mean, of course, you're a veteran in terms of being a part of the podcast, but I hope you had great time as well with us in the podcast.
Every podcast is different because every host is different and all questions are different.
Yeah.
And thanks for asking such meaningful and questions emanating from your own experience. And I totally enjoyed speaking about my book, and every experience makes my understanding deeper about this subject because it makes me think,
Yes.
because otherwise we just sit in our silos and we do our work.
Yes.
But when somebody asks us questions and we start thinking about it, we do create new channels in our own mind, and we create a new experience for our listeners as well. So thank you for having me here, and I totally enjoyed it, Raga.
Thank you. Thank you, Meenakshi.